I literally stumbled upon the destiny, the call, the purpose God had for me all along here at Charis.
One of the things that stood out to me more than probably anything else is just the whole community of Charis people. They're amazing, very receptive, very loving, very genuine, and I was able to mesh right in.
Discover your destiny. Prepare to live it. charisbiblecollege.org.
Okay, we'll start out. In the last session, there was a little bit of history I showed you that probably you weren't familiar with, like the original constitutions of 13 states. And I want to hit history again now, and I want to do it from a perspective of showing you what the Bible does with history. For example, if you look in the Bible and history, you have the story of King Josiah. King Josiah is trying to get God back in the center of the nation. He actually is rebuilding the temple. And in rebuilding the temple, they're not going as fast as he thought they should go. So he is really on to them about getting God back in the center of the nation. And as they're rebuilding the temple, they find this old scroll. And they bring out this old scroll. And when they show them the old scroll, they were already doing something good. And they go, my gosh, we used to be like that? Are you kidding me? And it led to a national revival. Simply finding out who they had been, it raised their expectations of what they should do. So that history, and by the way, you will find that in virtually every revival that goes on, history is always a key part of it. First Great Awakening, Second Great Awakening, Turner Church revivals. There's always a looking back and say, wow, we used to be like that? I didn't know that. And so we want to be like that again. And that's what leads to revival. Also, I'll point out to you that what happened in the book of Esther, the entire thing keyed around history. Because you remember that Mordecai saved the king's life. Mordecai was a really lower official. No indication the king knew him at all, knew anything about him. But Mordecai uncovered a plot to kill the king, and he saved the king's life, and the two guys are going to poison the king. And they wrote it all down in the history of the kingdom, like they would everything else. And Haman gets this thing of, I'm going to kill Mordecai. He won't bow to me, and I'm going to put these really high gallows, and when I hang him, everybody's going to see it, and they're going to know you don't cross Haman. And so the night before Haman intends to hang Mordecai, the king comes up with a case of insomnia, and he can't sleep. And so he says to his officials, bring me something to read. And so they brought him the history of his own kingdom. And as he's reading the history of his own kingdom, he says, Mordecai, this guy saved my life. I don't remember that I ever did anything for him. And so the next morning when he has his morning meeting with Haman, he says, Haman, what should I do for somebody who did something really special for me? Haman says, well, he's talking about me. And so Haman lays out this elaborate plan. And as it turned out, here's Mordecai back here, the lower official. As it turns out, and Haman lays out this elaborate plan. And the king says, great, go do that for Mordecai. And so they put Mordecai on the king's donkey and led it. And so what happened was, that incident caused Haman to be hung on his own gallows rather than Mordecai. What's it stem around? It stems around a case of insomnia where the king wanted something to read. He read the history of his own kingdom, and what he saw in that history shifted the entire book of Esther. Just that little thing about reading his own history. If you get in the New Testament and we have the birth of the New Testament church, the birth of the New Testament church really centers around Stephen. I mean, what Stephen did in talking to that group. And Stephen, in birthing the New Testament church, went through all the theology of it and went through this thing that we would call a doctoral dissertation. No, he didn't. What Stephen did was he went through history. He said, guys, don't you see what God's been trying to do? Let me remind you. Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and he went through all the generations up to the time of Christ, and this is what God's been trying to do in our nation all along. So it was all built around history, which is why the Bible tells us in passage after passage, recall the former days. Remember the former times. Now, the way we teach history in America today, nobody would like history, probably. I mean, we don't teach it the way that it should be. And I'm going to show you the way the history should be taught by an earlier historian. This man, Jedediah Morse, was a founding father. He was also a theologian. He was also held an office in federal government. And as a historian, he wrote the first book on the American Revolution, first history of the American Revolution. And in talking about the role of a historian, this is what he says. He says, the office of a historian is, number one, to record the progress of human affairs as directed by the providence of God. What a historian is supposed to do is show you God's fingerprints all the way across history. What we do in history is say, here's what God was up to, here's what he did here, here's how he intervened here. Now, you will not get that in our history studies today, which is why that it's really kind of a boring class, because there's no purpose to it. But if you see what God was up to, now history has purpose, now history has meaning, now you get direction from history. And so that's the way a historian is supposed to be. I want to give you one example. And this is called providential history, by the way. Providential history is seeing the providence of God in history. So that's the term we use now, is providential history. I want to take you to Abraham Lincoln for just a moment. Abraham Lincoln There is probably no president of the United States that used Bible verses in his speeches more frequently than Abraham Lincoln. This guy was amazing. I mean, he knew the Bible and quoted it all the time. But Abraham Lincoln was not a Christian, even at the time he was quoting the Bible. And about halfway through the Civil War, he shares with a minister from Illinois how he became a Christian. This is what that minister records from Illinois. Abraham Lincoln said, when I left Springfield, Illinois, when I left Springfield to go to the presidency, I asked the people to pray for me. I was not a Christian. When I became president, I asked you guys to pray for me. I left from Illinois to go to D.C. I asked you to pray for me, but I wasn't a Christian. He said, when I buried my son, the severest trial of my life, I was not a Christian. He said, but when I went to Gettysburg, and at Gettysburg, when I saw the graves of thousands of our soldiers, he says, I then and there consecrated myself to Christ. Yes, I do love Jesus. So this is what Lincoln records, or this is what the minister records about what Lincoln said. Now, at this point in time, Lincoln has had a spiritual change, and you can see it. His second inaugural address happened after this. There's probably no more spiritually profound speech in American history given by any president than what Lincoln gave in his second inaugural address. I mean, it is profoundly deep. It deals with some of the things we were talking about earlier, that God judges nations right now for what they do, blesses nations or curses nations. It's just a deep, and it's a short presidential speech, and it is just profound. Now, what Lincoln did, he recognized where the nation was in the Civil War, and he literally called the nation not to a time of prayer, but to a time of humiliation, fasting, and prayer. And he went back very much like we have in Deuteronomy with Mount Gabal and Mount Gerizim, where that you have the Mount of Blessing, the Mount of Cursing. He said, man, God told the people, he said, you're going to get in the promised land, and your blessing is going to become your curse, because you're going to think that you did this all. You're going to think you're going to be there enough generations that you'll think, man, look at all the prosperity we had. We've done a great job. And that's what he did. He got in the face of the nation and said, guys, we've had prosperity for so long, we think it came from us. And so he asked the nation to repent and fall on their face and get before God and recognize that it's his nation, etc. So I want to show you, having seen this background, I was on a TV program with Glenn Beck, national program. We were talking about this. I want you to see what we said here. So just listen to the next 2 minutes here.
Okay. Talking about Abraham Lincoln, the change in him, Gettysburg. He really, he says, now I'm a Christian, now I get it. And I don't know how many of us can really say that. I mean, we don't say we're a Christian, or we all say, oh, I believe in God, but how many of us can say, no. After all these tragedies, I still didn't get it. Now I get it. And he calls people to fast and pray and says, this is it, right? What happens?
Show you. This is a timeline of the major battles of the Civil War. Now, there's a lot of other minor battles. You got Pea Ridge, you got Stone River, you got all these other battles. But let me show you, as the Civil War progresses, how the Union was doing. The Union won Fort Henry and Fort Donelson. They won Shiloh, and that's it. Everything else belongs to the Confederacy. Then they get over here. They win Gettysburg. They win.
Where does the thing happen? Where does the...
Come back to that.
Okay.
Vicksburg. They win Chattanooga. They lose Spotsylvania, Cold Harbor. They win Petersburg, Richmond. They win on Sherman's March. They win Atlanta. They win Mobile Bay. They win Nashville. They win Appomattox. And that's the end of the Civil War. Now, pretty clear difference. That's where you had the National Day of Fasting and Prayer, right there. That's before, that's after.
Now, that's a providential view of history. I'll guarantee you none of you got that in your history books who went through school. But that's what historians are supposed to do, is show you the providence of God, show you the progress of human affairs directed by the providence of God. Second thing is to exhibit the connection of events, showing how an immense series is produced as cause and effect. Ideas do have consequences. There are things that do work, things that don't work. We don't teach that today. We're post-structural. Whatever you believe, that's good for you. Whatever your truth is, you live it out. No, that's not what history shows. There are causes and effects. And the third thing is to display the character of man and the character of God. Now, if you do that in history, if you display the character of man and the character of God, you find that technology changes, but human nature does not change. And that's why Constitution written 2 centuries ago still works today, because it didn't talk about the internet. It didn't talk about horses for transportation. It talked about principles of government based on the heart of man. We understood that we have constitutional separation of powers according to the Founding Fathers because of Jeremiah 17:9. That's why they separated the 3 branches of government. We have 3 branches of government because of Isaiah 33:22. There's so many passages I can show you in the Constitution. That's why it still works today. It has nothing to do with technology. Technology changes, character of man and God doesn't. And because the character of man and God do not change, that's why Ecclesiastes 1:9 is significant. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun. That's why history, you can always learn from history. That's why the Bible tells us to get into history. Now, to show you how this works in something today, when I was here a year ago, those of you that were here, I covered this thing about how practical the Bible is, and I showed you so many areas that are in the news right now where the Bible specifically addresses those areas. Most Christians cannot put a Bible verse to any of these topics, but the Bible specifically addresses them. I want to take one and show you one. And I want to do that by starting with a question. And here's the question I'll start with. From your knowledge of history, what is the first protected, the most important, and the longest cherished political right in America? What's the first political right we protected? Freedom of religion. I heard freedom of religion. Wrong. The first right was the rights of religious conscience. And here's how you need to understand how this has happened across the 4 centuries of American history. In the 16th century, in the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, which is the 17th, 18th, 19th century, all we talked about was the freedom of conscience. Now, when we got into the 20th century, that's where we started talking about freedom of religion, and that's what I heard from several. That we should. That's what we talked about. But in the 21st century, what we've been talking about is the freedom of worship. And you need to understand that when you start with the rights of conscience, you have to spiral downward to get to freedom of religion. And with freedom of religion, you have to spiral downward to get to freedom of worship. Freedom of conscience is much bigger, much more important than any of the other 2. Now, conscience is a big thing, and what is conscience, and what does it mean, and what does it encompass? We go back to the first dictionary ever done in American history, Noah Webster's original dictionary. This is the way he defines conscience. He says, conscience is the internal or self-knowledge, or it's the judgment of right and wrong. It's the faculty, power, or principle within us which decides on the lawfulness or unlawfulness of our own actions and affections and instantly approves or condemns them. Conscience is sometimes called the moral sense and is considered as an original part of our nature. God put a moral sense in our nature, and the conscience tells us, oh, you've done something immoral. You've crossed the line. You shouldn't be doing that. Conscience is very key because it's the one that alerts us when we violated the moral sense that God has put in our nature, which is why the Bible says, be really careful you don't sear your conscience, which some having done have turned aside from the faith. When you sear your conscience, then you don't have morals anymore. You don't know what's right and wrong, and therefore you get into behavior that takes you away from what faith tells you should be doing, except you don't know what faith tells you should be doing because the conscience is seared. It continues, it says, conscience is the first occupied in ascertaining our duty before we proceed to action, and then in judging our actions when performed. Conscience says, no, you shouldn't be doing that. And then if you do it, conscience will judge and say, I told you not to do that. That was the wrong thing. Or conscience will say, you need to be doing that. Okay, I'll do it. And you do it, and the conscience says, good job. You did the right thing. See, conscience tells you beforehand what's moral and immoral, and afterwards it tells you whether you violated those morals. Now, that's conscience. Now, conscience is a big deal because it's a big deal in the Bible. The Bible talks about conscience in over 30 verses in the New Testament. You have, for example, references like maintain a good conscience. We're told in the New Testament also to respect the differences of religious conscience with others. There are people who believe with communion, transubstantiation, consubstantiation. I'll take my position, but I'm going to respect your position because you think it's built on the Bible, and you can show me Bible verses for it. Nearly every Christian denomination that exists can show you Bible verses for why they pursue what they do, and I may or may not disagree, but that doesn't matter. I'm going to respect the differences of religious conscience as long as we get all the big things right, as long as we understand that it's Christ, it's His Word, it's salvation through Him, it comes by grace, not of works. We can differ on little things, and that's where conscience comes in, is how we apply our faith, how we see it working out with us. We're also told in the New Testament to don't wound the religious conscience of another. You can eat meat offered to idols, doesn't bother you, but it does them, and so I'll never again eat meat offered to idols if it wounds the conscience of my brother. That's what Paul says. I'm not going to violate somebody else's conscience. He continues, he says, He also protects religious conscience, and there's so many passages about protecting religious conscience. So with all of this talk about conscience, it's not surprising that the first settlers who came here thought this was a big deal. And that's because the Bible was a big deal to them. The Bible had been put up for 12 centuries, was not available in common language. These are really kind of the first generation of folks that can have a Bible. They haul around with them and actually read that Bible. And as they read the Bible and see what it says about conscience, they're in the New Testament. We know from their writings, they read this hours a day. And they didn't look at it as a spiritual devotional book. They looked at it as how to construct a civilization society. They use this, they point to civil rights out of this, private property out of this. They had a great relationship with Indians. The longest lasting treaty in American history was with these religious guys and Indians. What they did with education, what they did with the free market economic system, all came out of the Bible. So they're in the Bible looking for solutions, looking for answers, and they see what it says about conscience. And it's striking that these guys were really into the Bible. Everywhere they go, they haul their Bible with them. I mean, this is the book. This is their guidebook. This is the book they keep with them. And so as they do that, it's not surprising that the original colonial charters all protect conscience. First protected political right we have in America starts back in 1640, and it goes from colony to colony to colony. They protect the rights of religious conscience because they come here with the Bible, they read the Bible, it says protect the rights of conscience. They, from where they came from in Europe, were persecuted for conscience. And as John Quincy Adams pointed out, he said, conscience is the transcendent overruling principle. This is the thing on which America was founded. This is what it was done for, was rights of religious conscience. And of course, the reason for that is real simple. The guys who arrived here were being persecuted for conscience. I mean, if I take you back through world history at that time, you'll find that in 1630, 20,000 Puritans came to America because they were being persecuted for their conscience. They were part of the Anglican Church. They thought the Anglican Church was going corrupt, violating biblical teachings. They said, you shouldn't be doing that. The king said, you're criticizing what the church is doing. So he slit their nose, he chopped off their ears, sliced their tongue, said, let's see you criticize it now. So 20,000 of them came to America for the right of religious conscience, the right to be able to have a pure church as they saw a pure church, and they thought it was corrupt at that point in time. You have the same thing that happened in 1654 with Jews who were being persecuted in Portugal. They wanted to serve God, and they're reading scriptures and the government won't let them serve God. You've got the same thing in 1680. 10,000 Quakers came from England to America. They were required by law to attend only the Anglican Church. And William Penn and others said, but we're Quakers. We want to attend. You can't. It's illegal to attend. No rights of conscience. So they come to America where they can have Quaker churches, and that's how Pennsylvania was founded in 1682. You also have in 1683, the Anabaptists that were persecuted in Germany, they came to America. You find that in 1685, 400,000 came out of France to America because they were told, you can't be a Protestant, you have to be a Catholic. And so they killed 110,000 Protestants simply because they were Protestants. But their faith says, hey, this is the way we practice. We're Huguenots. We're not Catholics. This is what God wants us to do. Well, you're going to die then. And so 400,000 of them came to America, primarily found in South Carolina and New York. And this is just the story across time. 20,000 Lutherans are expelled from Austria. They fled to America. Was built on the rights of religious conscience, the ability to come here and pursue God's Word the way that you read God's Word, but it was around God's Word. I don't get to pursue my personal opinion. I pursue God's Word the way we interpret it. So the Quakers and the Presbyterians and the Lutherans and the Baptists and the Methodists, we all agree on the big things. We're a Christian nation, but we've got a lot of differences down under, and that's all right. We respect the rights of conscience on things like that as long as they are biblical in their essence. So that's the way America had been founded. So that's our original colonial charters. That's also what you'll find in those early state constitutions. We looked at the requirements for public office, but those state constitutions also protect the rights of religious conscience. As you move from the state constitutions to the U.S. Constitution, same thing happened. When we created the First Amendment, it did not guarantee freedom of religion. It guaranteed freedom of conscience. That's what all the guys said. John Jay, original Chief Justice, U.S. Supreme Court, one of the authors of the three authors of the Federalist Papers, John Jay said, security under our Constitution is given to the rights of conscience and private judgment. They are by nature subject to no control but that of the deity, and in that situation, they're now left free. Rights of conscience, you're accountable to God for what you do. And if your conscience says, I worship God by having this, then you do that, as long as it's biblical and it doesn't violate the Bible. I may disagree with your interpretation of transubstantiation or consubstantiation or infant baptism or immersion baptism. I may disagree on that, but if we get the salvation right through Christ, or we get the Bible as the Word of God, we can disagree on other things, and we'll protect those other things as long as they're within biblical scope. Thomas Jefferson said the same thing about the First Amendment. It's inconsistent with the spirit of our Constitution to force tender consciences. He said, our rulers can have authority only over such natural rights as we've submitted to them. The rights of conscience we never submitted. Government doesn't get to tell us what our conscience can and can't do. You also have this last part where he says, no provision in our Constitution, there it is again, ought to be dearer to man that which protect the rights of conscience. Now, we read the First Amendment, and it guarantees the free exercise of religious expression, and we call that freedom of religion. They called that freedom of conscience. Free exercise of religious expression. You get to express your faith according to the dictates of conscience as God has laid out in the Scriptures as you read the Scriptures. James Madison, very clear on what he said. He said, government's instituted to protect property of every sort. Government should protect your house and your car and your belongings. No one should take that from you. And he said, by the way, he said, conscience is the most sacred of all property. That's the number one thing government's supposed to protect is the rights of conscience. That's the way they viewed it at that point in time. Now, that's not the way we view it now, but that's the way they viewed it then. So back in that time, 17th, 18th, 19th century, 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, it was all about freedom of conscience. Now, as we get into the 20th century, we kind of start messing with conscience areas a little bit, and we do so primarily first in the medical arena. In the medical arena, we start messing with the rights of conscience in medicine by saying, well, physician-assisted suicide. If that's legal in the state and you're a doctor licensed in the state, you got to participate in that. And some Christian guys said, can't do it. We took an oath to do no harm, and this is doing harm. And by the way, we also believe the Bible. We're not supposed to be taking life. He holds the keys of death and of hell, not us. We don't get to decide when life ends. And the same thing, you had embryonic stem cell research. A lot of researchers said, can't do it. I can do adult stem cell because that does not kill a living human being. Embryonic stem cell, we have to kill an unborn child to get those stem. I'm not going to be part of that. Well, you're at the university of whatever it is, and we fund this, and we do research for the federal government. You're going to be part of it. No. If you work for us, you're going to know. And so conscience became a big issue. Same with euthanasia. People wouldn't participate. Birth control, Catholics said, no, no, no. We don't choose when life comes in the world. God does. We do not believe in birth control. God will choose when there's going to be life. RU-486, Plan B, abortifacient, abortion itself. We had a case in Illinois that took 19 years where Illinois government told Christian nurses, at hospitals where you work, you will participate in abortions. We can't do that. Yes, you will. And so after 19 years, the case was finally settled last year. But for 19 years, Christian nurses in Illinois had to participate in abortions. Well, they didn't. They quit and found other jobs elsewhere. They stayed out of the hospitals. That shouldn't be a choice they had to make. We should have respected the rights of religious conscience. So with all these issues that were out there, Benjamin Rush, who is called the father of American medicine, he's one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. This is the guy that found medical cures 200 years ago we still use today. This is what Benjamin Rush said about medicine and conscience. He says, in the writings of St. Paul, wow, founding father quoting the Bible. Yeah, that was very common back then. They regularly did. He said, in the writings of St. Paul, conscience is said to be the witness that accuses or excuses us of a breach of the law written in our hearts. What God has put in our hearts, conscience is the one who says, you got it right, you got it wrong. He continues. He said, the moral faculty performs the office of a lawgiver, while the business of conscience is to perform the duty of a judge. He says, the conscience, like a wise and faithful legislative counsel, performs the office of a check upon the moral faculties and thus prevents the fatal consequences of immoral actions. Conscience measures all her actions by the unerring square of right and wrong. The conscience is invisible and therefore removed beyond our investigation. Again, that's the definition we saw from Noah Webster. That's what God puts in our heart to say, I put a moral law on you. You know what's right and wrong if you listen to it, and the conscience tells you whether you've crossed that line or not. So conscience is really, 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 really important, and that's why we protected it. So medical rights of conscience, that was the big issue in the 20th century. But as we got into the 21st century, the rights of conscience had now moved in a different area, and that is what we would call, well, you see what happened with homosexual wedding. You know, bakers and florists and others that my conscience won't let me participate in a homosexual wedding. I mean, the Bible says that's wrong, and I can't be part of promoting and helping encourage something that's wrong. And so conscience is real clear for a lot of people on that, but now they're in court on it. Now they're being told, oh, you have to participate. And so that's part of what's called the sexual revolution. If you're not familiar with that term, it's been around for about 6 or 7 decades. And sexual revolution has gone through several evolutions in America, but every 8 or 10 years we add a new element to it. So back in the 60s, it was free love, then free sex, then free divorce, then free marriage. And, you know, but all it is, all sexual revolution is saying, here's God's standards, and we don't like God's standards. And so all along the way, it's always, so, you know, in the last 15 years or so, it's been homosexual marriage. And now in the last year or two, it's all about transgender rights. You know, what sexual, I am whatever sex I think I am. You can't tell me what I think I am. And so but that's, again, moving away from that biblical standard. Now, I'm going to back up and do a little personal commentary here for a minute. I'm a cowboy from Texas. I really like the cowboy life. I enjoy it. This is what I do when I have time to be home. And I've got friends, and we travel and do cowboy stuff all over the country. We travel all sorts of places, rugged places, hard to get into places. We love taking our horses and being in those places. And they're really remote oftentimes, and they're really rugged oftentimes, but we love going there. Earlier this year, I was in the Badlands of North Dakota, and it's a pretty rugged place in that area. And we were doing a cattle drive there. And the cattle get down in those trees in the bottoms of all those places and hide, and they'll get along the creek banks. And they're as wild as deer. And so you got to go in there and drive them out, and you try to get them up on top of the mesa, move them across the mesa. So we got them up on top of the mesa, started moving them across, and we had, I don't know, maybe 1,200 cows that we were dealing with moving across in this cattle drive. And so we get them into a pen up on top of the mesa. And why we do that is we want to take the calves out of there and treat the calves. They need to be branded. They need to have an ear tag. There's 7 different diseases they might catch. We want to make sure they don't get those diseases. We want to make sure they're strong, healthy, the mother's fine. And so you get them in there. And so out of those 1,200 cows, we had about 580 calves that we had to deal with. And so you go in and you rope a calf and you bring it out, and then as you bring the calf out, there's little groups of us that will descend on that calf and get everything it needs. And so, you know, right here, the guy on the right is putting an ear tag in. I'm the one, the plaid shirt in the middle. I'm getting ready to drop down after he puts the ear tag in, and then I'll give it a vaccination. My vaccination covers 3 of the diseases, 3 of the young diseases calves get, and so there's 7 different vaccinations they get. Mine had 3 in one. So we did this, and so this is what we do. And you know, we had those 580 calves. We had cowboys working. We had cowgirls working. An amazing thing, 580 calves. None of us had any difficulty telling which one was male and which one was female. It was really easy. We had no difficulty at all. It was just real simple. It's that easy all the way throughout nature. It's not hard in nature. And, you know, 4 times the Bible says, and God created them male and female, period. End of story. That's it. That's the genders. Now, we have difficulty with that now. We're not sure that there's really 2 genders because, again, the sexual revolution is about rejecting the Bible. The Bible said there's male and female, not us. We think, and if you don't know, there's now 82 officially recognized genders that are out there. I think Facebook has, Tim, is it 60-something? 66? Facebook has 66 different genders you can choose on your Facebook profile. And so this is affecting the way even Christians think. Christian University, Wesleyan University offers housing for every sexual persuasion, all these different letters. Now, it's interesting. What's missing in this? They don't have male or female. That is not an option. You don't have normal sexuality. You choose something else. So, but it's really simple on God's side. God made them male and female. End of story. That's where the discussion ends. Now this has become a conscience right. I don't want to be part of saying that there's 82 different genders when there's only 2 according to God. I want to choose God's word. This is a conscience issue that's going right now. So with all the conscience issues going on, the sexual revolution, remember again, there is nothing new under the sun. So I want to take you back and show you the origins of this back in the Bible. Genesis 19. God has heard that stuff is going over in Sodom and Gomorrah sexually that shouldn't be going on over there, but God's not going to do anything till he checks with his friend Abraham. So I'm not going to do anything till I talk to Abraham about this. So Abraham, the 2 angels come down, they meet with Abram, and God says, here's what I've heard, and here's what I'm going to plan on doing in that city. I'm going to check it out for sure. And that's where Abraham gets in negotiation. Well, if there were 50 righteous, would you destroy? How about 45? How about 40? And they go through this auction kind of thing, and they get down to the number where it's going to be. And at that point, God goes back to heaven, and the angels go over to Sodom and Gomorrah because they're going to see, because they don't do anything on hearsay. They have to go see it for themselves, which is part of our justice system, that you're required to have 2 to 3 witnesses before you can ever execute the death penalty. That's out of Deuteronomy 17. That's also constitutionally, if you get put to death for a capital crime like treason, you have to have 2 or 3 witnesses actually see the offense. So that's biblical stuff. And so they get over there, and they're with Lot. And by the way, they did not look like that when they got to Sodom and Gomorrah. You know from Hebrews that we're told, be careful how you treat other people because they could be angels unaware. They're actually angels, and you just didn't recognize them. So that really homeless guy in the corner, we're seeing how you're going to respond because that could be an angel just put there, planted there to see how you react. So they didn't come in looking like angels. They came in looking like normal people. When Lot saw them, he didn't know they were angels. So just 2 visitors come to town. And it's interesting the way Lot responds to those 2 when he sees 2 strangers come into Sodom and Gomorrah. he sees them come in, and out of Genesis 19, it says, the two angels arrived at Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting at the gateway of the city. He's just sitting there seeing what's going on, watching things the way he does, the gateway of the city. When he saw them, he got up to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. My lords, he said, please turn aside to your servant's house. Hey, that's being hospitable. And it says you can wash your feet and spend the night and then go on your way early in the morning. No, they answered, we'll spend the night in the square. Now, you need to understand that was a very common practice. Back in the Old West in America, you came into town, you needed a place to stay, you roll out your bedroll in the livery stable, something. Nobody's going to mess with you. Nobody's going to bother you. Just roll out your bedroll, sleep, get up next morning, take off. It's that way all over the world. And so what happened typically throughout the Middle East is you would come in, you would roll out your bedroll at the city square. If you had straw, you'd put it out, you'd lay on it, you'd sleep, get up and go the next. They said, no, we're just normal visitors. We're going to do what everybody else does. We're going to sleep in the square like everybody else. It's a safe place to be. And it says, but he insisted so strongly, that's the key word. He said, no, you don't understand. You don't want to be here. You don't know what's going on. He insisted so strongly that they did go with him and entered his house. He prepared a meal for them, baking bread without yeast, and they ate. And before they'd gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city, both young and old, surrounded the house. They called to Lot, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out so we can have sex with them. Now, notice, this is the demand of the sexual revolution. We're not going to leave you alone in your beliefs. You're going to come out and participate in our beliefs. We're not going to leave you in your house. We demand that you come affirm what we do. You're going to come out. That's been there since the beginning. The very thing we see right now with the sexual revolution is the first thing we saw with the sexual revolution back then. They're rejecting the morality of God, and what they insist is that you come affirm who they are and what they do and be part of it. Continue with the story. Genesis 19, Lot went outside to meet them and shut the door behind him and said, no, my friends, don't do this wicked thing. Look, I have two daughters who have never slept with a man. Let me bring them out to you and you can do what you like with them. But don't do anything to these men who've come under the protection of my roof. Now, what you have there is that is an offer for compromise. He's looking for middle ground. Now, I will point out that was a really stupid offer he made. You know, I've got two virgin daughters, take them. You need to understand, in his mind, he wasn't going near as far as what they wanted him to go. See, they say, bring those men out so we can have sex with them. Homosexuality. No. How about we meet right here in the middle? Now, let me tell you, anytime you try to make a compromise with the sexual revolution, you'll make a stupid deal. And that's what happened there. You try to move in the direction, well, you know, whatever rationale you want to use, I want to show that I don't hate. And so we move in that direction, you will make a stupid compromise. Let's continue. Get out of our way, they replied. This fellow came here as a foreigner, and now he wants to play the judge. No, that's not true. That is a false claim. He's lived with them peacefully ever since he got there. Years ago, when he and Abraham split out on the plains, that's where he went. And now they're saying he's a judge. He came here as a foreigner to judge us. That's not true. But you see, this is the way false claims work. In the political arena, what you do with a false claim is and it doesn't have to be a false, let me back up and rephrase that. What you want to try to do, when you make a claim, you want your opposition to repeat it. If you can get your opposition to repeat the claim, you know you're winning. And by the way, I watch races all over the nation. I was watching a Senate race, even your Senate race right here in Colorado, looking at the ads that are on TV. I can tell you who's leading in the Senate race and who's far behind in the Senate race by the claims they repeat. And what happens is, in the political world, what you do is you try to throw out a claim and you want your opponent to repeat your claim. Here's how it works. I'm in a debate, I'm at the podium, I say, when did you stop beating your wife? Now, what will happen over here is they're going to beat my wife. I've never beat my wife. Why would you say that I beat my wife? I'm so offended you said I beat my wife. And what they do, people say, oh, he's the guy that keeps talking about beating his wife. It doesn't matter that you deny it. Once you start repeating and repeating and repeating and repeating, they remember that that's where the claim came from, and you keep talking about what they're talking. You must beat your wife. They don't hear that you deny the claim. So when you start repeating your opponent's claim, they're winning. You Christians are all a bunch of haters. You just hate gays. Oh, I don't hate gays. I've got lots of gays for friends. There's no hate in me. I mean, we love the sinner but hate the sin. So what we do is we repeat their claims. And so the world looks at oh, Christians are a bunch of haters, man. They just hate gay. We're repeating their claims all the time. We're just reinforcing what they said. And so when you get a false claim thrown at you, you don't repeat it. You go a totally different direction. So you get the false claim. Next thing we see in the Bible is the story says, we'll treat you worse than them. They kept bringing pressure on Lot and moved forward to break down the door, but the men inside reached out and pulled Lot back into the house and shut the door. You will find that the meanness and the threats and the coercion come from the other side. They call us mean, they threaten. See, Romans 2:21 says, thou that accusest another accuses thine own self also. Generally, you accuse other people of what you're guilty of. And so what happens is they accuse us of meanness and threats and coercion, and no, they're the ones that practice that form, but they put it over on us, and oh, I'm not mean, I don't have any, there's not a mean bone in my body. See, we repeat their stuff over and over again. But this is not the only time you find the sexual revolution mentioned in the Bible. If you go into Judges 19, there's a passage in Judges 19, and in Judges 19 you have this Gibeonite, you have this Levite who has a woman, a concubine, and which in that situation is more like a wife, and he's taken her and he's heading back to his part of Israel, and he got started too late to make it home in one day, so he has to stop in Gibeah on the way home. And as he stops in Gibeah, he's going to do the same thing. He's going to lay out his bedroll, and they're going to sleep in the city square, and an old man sees them. And this is what the old man says. It says, "You're welcome to my house," the old man said. "Let me supply whatever you need. Only don't spend the night in the square." There's another. That's really out of character for what they did back then. Don't stay out here. He says, so he took him into his house and fed his donkeys. After they had washed their feet, they had something to eat and drink. While they were enjoying themselves, some of the wicked men of the city surrounded the house. Pounding on the door, they shouted to the old man who owned the house, "Bring out the man who came to your house so we can have sex with him." There it is again. That's the demands of the sexual revolution. We want you to come participate in what we do. You're going to affirm our lifestyle. And so the next thing you see is the owner of the house went outside and said to them, "No, my friends, don't be so vile. Since this man is my guest, don't do this outrageous thing. Look, here's my virgin daughter and his concubine. I'll bring them out to you now, and you can use them however you wish. But as to this man, don't do such an outrageous thing." There's that stupid compromise again. When you start trying to make a compromise with the sexual revolution, it's a stupid compromise no matter what it is. It continued. It says, "But the men would not listen to him, so the man took his concubine and sent her outside to them. They raped her and abused her throughout the night, and at dawn they let her go." So again, the meanness and the coercion, all that comes from the other side. Now, the way we see this applied modern life right now, let me take you some recent examples. Barton Stutzman, the florist out of Washington State. Notice the headline. Notice the headline. ACLU sues 70-year-old Christian flower shop owner for refusing to participate in gay wedding. She said, "There's all sorts of other florists that'll do your wedding, but as a Christian, I can't. Here's a dozen florists you can go." We don't want them. We want you. You've got to come do our wedding. We're not after flowers. We're after you affirming what we do. And so as a result, the judge ruled that florists can lose their personal assets for declining a gay wedding. For saying that I'm not going to participate, you can lose everything you own. That's civil process now. See, who's doing the forced participation? Is it us? No, it's them. Sexual revolution. Same thing with Melissa and Aaron Klein. They're out of Oregon, Sweets Cake Bakery. Look at the headline again. Christian baker to be forced into bankruptcy for refusing to participate. You're going to come out and affirm what we... And they said, "No, here's a dozen bakers that'll do this for you." We just can't. But there's a dozen bakers that'll be happy to. We don't want them. We want you. So again, it's the forced participation. By the way, Oregon, the Christian bakers, they had to pay $135,000 for refusing to participate. So forced participation on the other side. Here's another example. Robert and Cynthia Gifford, their home in New York, that's a cool home. That'd be a fun home to live in. And they let people use their home from time to time for weddings. And a homosexual couple came and said, "We want to use your home." And they said, "Can't do that." They're fined for refusing to host a same-sex wedding on their farm in their own home where they live. They don't get the choice to say no. No, that was the same thing that we saw in Genesis 9 and Judges 9, or Genesis 19 and Judges 19. Forced participation. You also have Elaine Hugen. She's out of New Mexico. She's a photographer. The court ruled that she cannot refuse. You cannot say no. You have to go out and participate and affirm. And again, as a Christian, she said, "Here's a dozen photographers. We don't want them. We want you." So again, the forced participation. You have the case of Jack Phillips here in Colorado. Jack Phillips is facing prison for refusing to bake. Again, here's a dozen bakers. No. I can't be the one. Here's a dozen that'll do it. No, we want you. So again, the forced participation. Katie Lang, out of my state of Texas. Katie Lang is a county clerk when the Supreme Court ruled that you have to have gay weddings in these 32 states that have rejected it, that you have to do it. She's a county clerk. They went to her in Hood County, Texas, and they said, "We want a marriage license." They got the marriage license within 15 minutes of asking for it. But she sent someone else in her office out to give it. She wouldn't give it to them. And because she wouldn't give it to them, they now have a federal lawsuit going against her because she had to be, they got the license within 15 minutes. That's not what we want. We want you to come see the forced participation all the way through. You got to understand how this works, because there's nothing new under the sun. I mean, this is the way it's been. And you know, as the headline now said, it's open season on Christians after pro-gay. And by the way, this is why you got to take back the mountain of civil government. You get different judges, you get different people in office. They're not going to be throwing Christians in $135,000 fines. I say, no, we've got the rights of conscience. That's what the First Amendment protects. I'm not going to put a $135,000 fine on people who bake cakes because they won't participate with. You have the right to choose where you participate. So that's one. The last one I'll give you here, I probably won't get through this in time. I'm going to start at 21st. The freedom of worship means you can practice your faith as long as it's not out there where it really affects people. As long as nobody knows you're practicing your faith, you can do it. So I'll take you to this headline. All these headlines of people being arrested for practicing their faith. See this one? Arizona pastor arrested, jailed for holding a Bible study in his own home. His wife said it defies logic. Bible study leader Michael Salmon is sitting in jail today after his home was raided earlier this week by more than a dozen Phoenix, Arizona police officers and officials. His offense? The city says people aren't allowed to hold private Bible studies on their own property. Solomon was sentenced to 60 days in jail, 3 years probation. He received a $12,180 fine. Freedom of worship, you can do it if nobody knows about it, but people found out you're having a Bible study in your home. Here's the next one. Mall to Christians, God Talk banned. Look at this. A youth pastor was arrested at the Galleria Mall for having a conversation on religion with two other people. An officer heard him talking about God, took him down on the floor, slammed him in the marble thing, handcuffed him for mentioning God in a mall. How dare you do something like that? This one, man jailed on public sidewalk. Gideon's arrested after school officials complained they were handing out Bibles on a public sidewalk where everybody, and you know how dangerous the Gideons are. It's a good thing, man. We don't worry about terrorists, but we do worry about Gideons. And are you kidding me? Standing on a sidewalk handing out Bibles, and the guy spent 2 days in jail. Here's one. Pennsylvania Christians face 47 years in prison for reading the Bible in public. 4 Christians are facing up to 47 years in prison and $90,000 in fine for preaching the gospel on a public sidewalk. Here's another one. Giving out tracts becomes a federal case. 67-year-old Georgia man who was arrested, held in jail for 2 days, convicted without being given access to a lawyer. They wouldn't even let him have an attorney once they arrested him. They kept him in jail without an attorney for passing out gospel tracts on a public street. Praying in Park puts a man in jail for 9 days. According to his wife, police escorted him out of a court hearing in handcuffs in front of his crying children to begin serving his 9-day sentence. He prayed in a public park and somebody saw him. Really? This is the kind of stuff that goes on? This is a book you can download online. It's undeniable. It gives you about 1,800 examples of this stuff going in America. Again, different officials, you get different results with this. But if Christians aren't going to vote, if they aren't going to be involved, we can't complain about what's happening because it's a self-inflicted wound. 72% of this nation says they're Christians. If they just acted like it and voted like it, we wouldn't have this kind of stuff going on. So it's easy stuff. Going back to where we were, there is nothing new under the sun. I want you to understand something about the sexual revolution, but you need to understand that the rights of conscience are the most important thing you can possibly protect. I'll close out with this quote by, oh boy. Oh, no. This is long break. I got 7 more minutes. Good. I can make it through at this point. So Jedediah Morse, the guy I started with, I'm going to close with him. This is what he said. To the kindly influence of Christianity, we owe that degree of civil freedom and political and social happiness which mankind now enjoys. All the freedoms we enjoy came from Christianity. So everything in Christianity produced the social and political freedom and happiness that Americans enjoy. He says, in proportion as the genuine effects of Christianity are diminished in any nation, if you can squash Christianity down, he says, in the same proportion will the people of that nation recede from the blessings of genuine freedom and approximate the miseries of complete despotism. The more you squelch Christianity down, the less freedoms you have and the more despotic your nation becomes. Kind of looks like those articles we saw up there. He said, all efforts made to destroy the foundations of our holy religion ultimately tend to the subversion also of our political freedom and happiness. When you whack Christianity, you're whacking our political freedom and our social and political happiness. Whenever the pillars of Christianity shall be overthrown, our present Republican forms of government, all the blessings which flow from them, must fall with them. And by the way, you need to understand Republican there. When they say Republican, that's not partisan. It doesn't mean a capital R Republican Party. Little r Republican is the form of government that God ordained in Exodus 18:21. It's where you choose out leaders from among you, leaders over tens, fifties, hundreds, thousands. A Republican form of government is where you elect people to represent you at all levels of government. So he says, when you get rid of Christianity, if you overthrow Christianity, you're going to see our present forms of government go away. And by the way, all this attack on Christianity, did you know that last year we had 3,800 new federal laws added to the books? That's a lot of laws. Only 126 of them were voted on by the House and the Senate and signed by the President. 3,650 of our federal laws came from people not elected to office at all. They are bureaucrats who write laws, who give jail sentences, who give fines. Wait a minute, that's not, yeah, that's right, that's not a Republican form of government. Republican form of government is where we elect people to make our laws and our policies. We now have a nation where that 99% of our laws and policies are not made by people we elect. As a matter of fact, Senator Mike Lee from Utah, in his office, he has a visual demonstration of that. You walk in his office, he has a stack of papers over here that are all the laws passed by Congress last year, and the stack of papers is about 3.5 inches big. Over here, he has a stack of all the federal laws that were passed last year by bureaucrats that were not voted on by the House or Senate, signed by the President. It's 11 feet tall. That's not a Republican form of government. That's what he says. Whenever the pillars of Christianity should be overthrown, our present Republican forms of government, where we elect people to make policies under which we live, that'll fall. It all goes away because it came out of the Bible. So, in looking at all these issues out there, this is just one issue, the rights of conscience. The Bible speaks to this emphatically, very clearly, 30 verses on it. We've got to become biblically literate over what God says in the Bible and all the issues we deal with today. The Bible has all the solutions for life. We just got to get back to those solutions. You guys have got an extra 3 minutes, so enjoy yourself. See you back in 13 minutes.